Picture the food bowl. You just filled it to the brim with the good stuff, and there sits your cat, staring out it. She leans in, sniffs, and pulls back. Then she reaches in with one paw, hooks out a single piece of kibble, drops it on the floor, and eats it off the tile. When we see this behavior, we reach for familiar labels. We assume she is being fussy, ungrateful, or maybe a little weird, leaving a perfectly good pile of food untouched while deliberately making a mess on the ground. The cause of this standoff has nothing to do with the recipe you bought or your cat's attitude. To figure out what is actually happening, you have to stop looking at the kibble and start looking at the steep, narrow walls of the dish holding it. Your cat is dealing with a specific physical friction between her facial anatomy and the human-designed curvature of her dish. Veterinarians and researchers call this phenomenon whisker fatigue. What looks to us like an irrational tantrum is actually a highly logical workaround. She is quietly managing an invisible sensory problem that you and I simply lack the physical hardware to feel. We call them whiskers. Scientists call them vibrissae. Calling a vibrissae a hair is like calling a fiber optic cable a piece of string. It is technically a strand growing out of the skin, but what happens inside it belongs to a completely different biological category. This diagram illustrates the sheer physical density of a vibrissae. A normal piece of cat fur on the left sits in a shallow pocket with maybe 2 or 3 nerve endings attached. A single whisker follicle on the right is rooted 3 times deeper into a cushion of blood vessels, packed with between 100 and 200 nerve endings. That is roughly 50 times the wiring of an ordinary hair. All of that wiring feeds straight into a large section of the cat's sensory brain. Each individual whisker traces back to its own specific spot in the cortex. It operates like a switchboard where every single line has a dedicated channel, processing touch at fingertip resolution. The base of each follicle is loaded with proprioceptors, position sensors that map out physical space. Because the widest whiskers on her face span the exact width of her body, she can brush them against a gap in pitch darkness and instantly calculate the spatial math. She knows if she will fit through a tight opening before her shoulders ever commit to the attempt. Her face is effectively an always-on, high-resolution topographical radar, taking continuous measurements of the physical world around her. Imagine taking that hypersensitive radar array and shoving it face-first into a deep, steep-sided ceramic canyon just to get dinner. Looking at this vector model, you can see what happens when a cat lowers her head into a narrow bowl. Those long antennas fan out and bend against the curved walls. With every bite, those sensors drag across the hard surface, again and again. To a biological system built to detect a moth's wing beat in the dark, the inside of that bowl is a wall of inescapable, overwhelming noise. This friction explains a whole catalog of strange habits. It explains why she might eat a perfect moat around the edges and only consume food from the very center. It also explains why she might march past 3 full water dishes to dip a single paw into a dripping faucet, or prefer the wide rim of a nightstand water glass. When a precise sensor gets touched constantly with no way to switch it off, she executes a calculated workaround to avoid the relentless bombardment. Within the veterinary community, this theory faces some friction of its own. Careful scientists tend to ask for hard evidence when the loudest advocates warning you about a malady happen to be the exact same companies selling specialized, wide, whisker-friendly bowls. To test the commercial claims, researchers published a study in the Journal of Feline Medicine and Surgery in 2021. They set up a direct experiment, feeding cats from both ordinary deep bowls and wide whisker-friendly ones, and rigorously tracked the behavior. This chart compares the 2 main metrics from the study: how much food the cats consumed, and how long they spent eating. The levels for both the deep bowl and the wide bowl performed identically. The shape of the dish made 0 significant difference to their eating capability. By the hard numbers, the steep walls of a normal bowl are not starving anyone. Whisker fatigue does not cause measurable physical harm or severe dietary distress, making it very difficult to classify as a clinical disease. The researchers did note a distinctly feline detail in the results. While the deep bowl didn't physically stop them from eating, when the cats were given a direct choice between the two, they consistently favored the wide, whisker-friendly dish. It is identical to choosing a padded armchair over a hard wooden bench. The bench won't harm you, and you can finish a meal there if you must, but you naturally prefer the option that leaves you comfortable. You do not need a medical diagnosis to run a free experiment in your own kitchen. Try swapping her deep bowl for a flat ceramic plate or a saucer. Offer the wide dish right next to her usual bowl. Step back and let her vote with her paws. Whether she ignores the plate completely or finishes her meal in one calm sitting, you will learn something about how she navigates her environment. She lives in a complex landscape of air currents and spatial math, reading reality through 20-some antennas wired directly into her brain. Accommodating these habits is not an act of indulging a spoiled pet. It is a choice to listen to a deeply wired sensory language that we are finally beginning to understand.